This sounds like a normal AI news story at first. New model, bigger benchmarks, a bunch of impressive customer quotes. But I think the useful part of the Fable 5 story is what happened after launch. Anthropic announced Claude Fable 5 and Claude Mythos 5. Fable was the version most people were supposed to use. Mythos was the restricted version for trusted cyber defenders, infrastructure providers, and eventually some biology researchers. The important detail, Anthropic described them as the same underlying model. The difference was access and guardrails. That's the part I'd pay attention to if you build on top of these APIs. This isn't just a model launch, it's a preview of what frontier AI deployment may start to look like. General access, trusted access, fallback access, monitoring, and policy risk, all wrapped around the same capability tier. So first, what actually launched? Anthropic said Fable 5 was the most capable model it had ever made generally available. They said it was strong in software engineering, knowledge work, vision, scientific research, and long-running tasks. The long-running task part is what matters to me. A lot of AI demos still live in the world of, look, it generated a file. Cool. But the more useful question is whether it can keep working inside a messy environment. Can it read the repo, make a change, run the check, look at the error, adjust, and keep going without losing the plot? That's why the customer quotes around Fable were interesting. Stripe reportedly used it on a 50 million line Ruby codebase and compressed a migration from more than 2 months of human work into a day. Cursor, GitHub, Replit, Figma, Notion, Zapier, and others all describe some version of the same pattern. Longer horizon work, fewer turns, more ability to use unfamiliar tools. Now, obviously, those are launch quotes. You should read them with that context. But the shape is useful. The value is moving away from one good answer and towards sustained execution. Not just write me a function, more like, here's the objective, here are the constraints, here are the tools, keep working until the check passes. That's the optimistic version of the story. The more complicated version is the safety design. Anthropic said Fable 5 and Mythos 5 are basically the same model family. Mythos has some safeguards lifted for trusted users. Fable is the general model, but it has classifiers around high-risk domains. If a request looks like cybersecurity, biology, or chemistry, or model distillation, Anthropic said the request would fall back to Claude Opus 4.8 instead of Fable. Users were supposed to be told when that happened. That's a pretty important product design choice. It's not a simple refusal. It's not, sorry, we can't help. It's more like, this request is still allowed, but it gets handled by the next model down because the most capable model is too risky for that domain. In Anthropic's own numbers, those fallbacks were expected to trigger in less than 5% of sessions. So for most normal work, you'd still get Fable. But for sensitive work, the product experience changes. If you build AI products, that matters. You can't assume the model name behind the curtain is stable across every request. One user might get Fable, another might get Opus. A trusted access customer might get Mythos. A sensitive request might trigger a fallback. And the user may not understand why the answer suddenly feels different. That's a UX problem, not just a policy problem. Then the story got weirder. A few days after launch, Anthropic said the US government issued an export control directive requiring suspension of access to Fable 5 and Mythos 5 by foreign nationals, including foreign national Anthropic employees. The practical effect was that Anthropic disabled both models for all customers to make sure they were complying. CNBC reported the same basic point. Access was pulled abruptly, and other Anthropic models were not affected. Anthropic said the government letter didn't give specific details of the national security concern. Their understanding was that it involved a possible method of bypassing or jailbreaking Fable 5. Anthropic pushed back pretty hard. They said what they reviewed looked like a narrow, non-universal jailbreak that found a small number of previously known minor vulnerabilities. They also said other public models could find similar issues without the bypass. So there are two different questions here. One question is technical. Was this actually a universal jailbreak, or was it a narrow technique that didn't create much new capability? The other question is operational. What happens to customers when a frontier model gets pulled almost immediately after launch? For builders, I think the second question is the one you can actually act on. You probably don't control export directives. You probably don't control Anthropic's internal safety process. You definitely don't control whether a government agency decides a model is too risky. But you do control how fragile your own product is when the model underneath it changes. That's the lesson here. If your app depends on one frontier model staying available forever, you have a single point of failure. Maybe that failure is pricing, maybe it's rate limits, maybe it's capacity, maybe it's policy, maybe it's a model being pulled because someone found a scary enough jailbreak. The reason doesn't really matter to your customer. What they experience is that the workflow stopped working. So the practical takeaway is pretty boring, but it's important. Build a model abstraction layer. Log which model handled which request. Keep an evaluation harness so you know what breaks when you switch models. Have a fallback provider for the workflows that matter. Explain capability changes to users instead of pretending nothing changed. And design your product around the outcome, not the temporary name of the model. That's especially true for agentic workflows. If the agent is just drafting a paragraph, maybe a fallback is fine. But if the agent is inside a repo, modifying files, running tests, checking screenshots, or updating a client workflow, you need to know when the model changed. You need to know whether the checks still pass. You need to know whether it became cheaper, slower, less reliable, or less capable. This is where I think the Fable 5 story is actually useful. The headline is that Anthropic launched a very powerful model and then pulled access days later. The builder lesson is that frontier AI is starting to look less like normal SaaS and more like controlled infrastructure. It's powerful, it's metered, it's monitored, it's politically sensitive, and sometimes the capability you thought you had yesterday isn't the capability you get today. That doesn't mean you shouldn't build with it. I still think these tools are moving fast and they're useful. It just means the serious products need a little more discipline. Don't build around one model name. Build around the job the user needs done. Then make the model layer swappable enough that a policy shock, rate limit change, or safety fallback doesn't break the whole workflow. That's not as exciting as saying Fable 5 changes everything, but it's probably the more useful takeaway. The models are going to keep getting better. The access rules are going to keep getting more complicated. The winners will be the products that turn unstable frontier capability into reliable customer outcomes. That's my read on Fable 5. If access comes back, I want to test whether the long horizon coding claims actually show up in a normal build workflow. But for now, the release pattern is the story.